Transformational Information for the Facilities Manager. It will be presented by Deke Smith today. Everyone has been muted for audio quality. Please type your questions into the chat box and we'll go over them during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. Next slide. Okay, the FMCC does provide many services to the FM community, such as Ask the Expert, Find a Consultant, Locate a Speaker, and online educational resources. You also may find more information at their website, fmcc.ifma.org. We would also like to thank our sponsors, ISS Facility Services and Kane Consulting. Now, I do want to note, when you do leave the presentation today, there will be a survey that comes up, and I encourage you to take that survey. The FMCC board does eagerly look towards that feedback. Also, a PDF of the PowerPoint will be sent to all who have registered for the webinar today. I'm the moderator, Joshua Amos, and again, our presenter is Deke Smith, FAIA. Okay, and I think, Deke, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you very much, Joshua. I appreciate it, and welcome to everybody that's taking time out of your busy day to listen a little bit about what's happening with information in the facilities industry. Our learning objectives today is really to learn about BIM, Building Information Modeling, and what changes we really need to make happen in order to take full advantage of it. And also to give you an idea of what's happening worldwide. As I'm involved in, first of all, I was the one that kind of initiated the National CAD Standard and the National BIM Standard. I was involved in the AI layering guidelines before we got to the National CAD Standard. I'm also involved in the whole building design guide, which hopefully many of you have been using. We get about 3 million unique document downloads a month out of that system. And so I've been involved in a lot of this for too many years, probably. And if you are just getting started, I might also recommend a book that Michael Tardif and I wrote on building information modeling, looking at really the strategic point of view, which I think is a great place to start, so that you really understand what we're trying to do overall, instead of just what any of the software vendors are trying to sell you. buildingSMART Alliance is the United States chapter of a larger organization called buildingSMART International. But we're also and as you can see, buildingSMART International now has chapters in all these countries. I think we've got new ones coming up in Mongolia and Malaysia and Brazil. Those are the ones that I'm on the executive committee of the buildingSMART International also, so keep track of some of those kind of things. But buildingSMART Alliance is also a council of the National Institute of Building Sciences, and the National Institute of Building Sciences is really the home of the National CAD Standard and the National BIM Standard, and we'll be addressing a little bit of the National BIM Standard issues today. So what I want to look at is, just what problem are we trying to solve? And I think I've heard that from some of the facility managers. BIM is just a problem looking for a solution, or vice versa. Talk about what we see as the scope of BIM, and I think it might surprise you in some aspects. Also, I want to talk about it's only going to work if we really have a team concept, and we'll talk more about that. I think another big piece is building trust, so that you don't go out and recollect all the information, is really pretty much what happens today, and also that it's a life cycle approach. And in order to be your facilities be sustainable, it can't be just the first cost. We have to look at things from a life cycle point of view. All of this, I believe, will empower the owners. It's a wonderful feeling when you have an information-rich facility that you have confidence in the information that you have when you make decisions. So all these things are kind of wrapped into this, a lot of the things that buildingSMART and buildingSMART Alliance and all the other organizations worldwide are working on. So first question I wanted to ask was just kind of what kind of group we have today: designers, contractors, facility managers, owners, and anybody else. So if you'll answer that poll, Joshua will keep an eye on how fast those are coming in, and then we'll take a look at what the group looks like.
17% said they're designers, 0 said they're contractors, 44% said they're facility managers, 6% said they're owners, and 33% said other.
Interesting. Okay, great. Well, that's, and I think it's interesting. I'm glad to hear. Certainly, it makes sense that there's a lot of facility managers since it's IFMA. But I think also the designers. That's really the group that has a lot of. Interestingly enough, it has a lot of work to do because they are the first people to talk to the owner, typically, and they really need to be able to see BIM as being an opportunity for additional services. I think the, and again, I'm glad to see some owners because I think that's really who we're ultimately selling all of this to because it is going to improve the overall product. So what are we trying, the problem we're trying to do? One of the problems in the construction industry is we haven't really implemented, we haven't changed anyway in our implementation on using information. And so our overall productivity is, I'll say flatlined, although if you look, it's just slightly decreasing, where a lot of other industries have gone out and really started making some big major changes. As I say here, you know, we don't know how much, excuse me, we don't know how much it should cost to build it. We know how much we pay. Here's an example. I don't know how many of you have seen this, but you can go out and just Google 30 stories in 15 days, China, and you'll see this. But here's a facility in China that they built literally in 15 days. Now, obviously, there's a lot of prefabrication that's done. Obviously, there's you know, a lot. You know, we're not saying that we should build all the buildings in 15 days, but I think it does say, you know, it does say something that you can build a high-quality facility in a short period of time if you do some planning for it and things like that. The other thing I looked at on this project was, okay, if I've got 330 rooms and I'm delivering them in 15 days, and it normally takes 570 days, say 19 months from contract to occupancy for a hotel, 330 rooms, if I'm just using $100 a day for those rooms, and I'm delivering 550 days early at $55,000 per room, that comes out to $18 million extra revenue that could be in the owner's pocket. Okay, so again, I'm not saying we should deliver all the buildings in 15 days, but it does certainly point out the fact that there is some real money. This is just one project. You know, so there is some real money by improving our process. Now, the other side of that is we could produce a product in one day, and the owner would, you know, still say, well, you know, how can you do it in a half day? So there's, you know, there's really no, we're not going to ever win on this, I guess you could say. But it is something we can definitely improve our productivity and have an impact on the facilities that we deal with. So the next question is, what do you feel like the scope of BIM is? And so we've got, you know, same as I've heard people talking about virtual design and construction, and we don't have a lot of contractors, although contractors are usually calling it, a lot of them are calling it virtual design and construction. Commissioning is another area. Infrastructure, industrial facilities. You know, what do you think really BIM is all about? I know, you know, it's called building information modeling, and you know, sadly, that's probably not the best term. So I'm not seeing the results. Joshua, show when you get them.
Results are 10% same as virtual design and construction, and then it's 0, 0, 0, and then 90% all of the above.
There you go. Okay, that was a trick question, right? And exactly, you know, it is. It's we're really getting into now GIS and bringing that world in, and infrastructure, really the infrastructure that supports facilities. So, you know, the old 5-foot line has really disappeared, and really kind of integrating all of the, you know, all the different aspects together. The other big issue is industrial facilities, and I think that's one of the, there's actually almost a parallel universe on BIM right now, where they're using a different international standard. And so one of the things we're looking at working with FAIA, which is an organization that's that has a lot of industrial client or customers. They're an organization similar to ours, and we're looking at how to converge those two efforts, and we're seeing things like that happening. One of the first projects was the Crossrail project in the UK, where they really started looking at above and underground utilities, and did a really nice job of tying all the GIS and everything into it. But now we're also seeing other organizations looking at plant design, and there's kind of a moniker that's been coined now, BIM-IMM, which is infrastructure model management, and actually that started over in India. But we're looking at several different ISO standards, as I mentioned. Typically with BIM, we look at 16739, which is IFC, but the other standard that I was talking about is 15926. Again, more towards industrial facilities, where they're looking at like the coefficient of friction in pipe and things like that for a petrochemical plant. But there's probably almost 20 different ISO standards that have applicability to BIM. And so we're working with several different technical committees in ISO, and we're going to have some big meetings up in Toronto at the end of October. So again, looking at how all these things tie together, you've got airport projects. You certainly got a tremendous amount of infrastructure that goes into those. You've got rail, metro, and things like that. There's a lot of integration of different types of things in that environment. One of the aha moments that I had when I got started on all this was listening to Frank Gehry. And Frank Gehry, who, as you know, is a rather interesting designer, he was getting into a situation where structural engineers weren't willing to work with him because there was too much risk on his projects. And fabricators, steel fabricators, were saying, well, there's too much risk, we don't really want to go. And then the owners were starting saying, well, if everybody else thinks there's so much risk, maybe I don't want to use your designs because there's so much risk there too. So what he did was started Gehry Technologies, and Dennis Shelton heads that effort up. And so this is the first project that they did, and you can see on the third diagram there, the steel, all that steel was delivered and with 0 change orders. All the pieces fit together the way they were supposed to. They were modeled directly from the model. And the steel industry is probably the one that's transformed the most, because now they're going from models all the way to fabrication. There's a great little video you can look from a company called Beam Master, B-E-A-M Master. If you just Google it and look for a YouTube video on that, it shows how they pick up a piece of steel, use a robot to weld the base plate on and any other angles and all that kind of stuff, and put it out and grab another one. And so that's really changing the way that industry is going, and I think we're starting to see that happen in a lot of other areas. So to kind of give you a little bit of an idea on how all this, how all this comes together, we've got really an information pipeline that we're talking about that goes through the whole process from planning, design, construction operations to sustainment. How do we get information to flow through that pipeline? Because typically right now we have these silos that stop the information flow. So we're looking at how do we take GIS information, how do we take legal plots, how do we go out and do some fabrication, how do we go out and do energy analysis and things like that, all off the same information. This is the concept here, is to be able to capture the information one time and then be able to reuse it through the life cycle and not recollect it at each stage. So we can do simulations are really starting to be a big issue because you can work with the owner and simulate how they're going to actually use the facility. Because one of the problems when we do energy analysis, then we go out and do see how the building's being used later on, it's typically not being used by the way that it was originally intended. And so then the energy model doesn't really work the way it was intended. So if we can go through and do some simulations and see how it works, have a better chance of doing that. Going out and ordering products, getting information from the manufacturers. We're doing a lot of work in that arena right now. We're going through and doing code checking is another big area that's getting started. Again, it's a worldwide effort. FAIA is also working on that part of the project, going out and doing invoicing and doing that all electronically. One of the problems that we have is we turn information into unusable formats. We put it back out on paper. We put it into PDF. and it really takes away a lot from the information. Clash detection was one of the first things we did, and actually we can still do, and it's still very valuable, as well as scheduling. Those are probably the big areas that contractors use BIM right now the most. Life cycle costing, I mentioned that earlier. That's a huge area. If we're talking about sustainability and resiliency and things like that, we can't be talking about first cost anymore. We have to talk about life cycle. Then we start getting into CMMS and CAFM programs, operations centers, things like that, yeah, CMMS, I guess I already mentioned that. But also first responders can use this information, as well as in a demolition environment. So one of the things we have, and I don't know how many people have heard of COBE, but it's a Construction Operations Building Information Exchange. And basically that's one of the only things that we have right now where information actually flows. So we're looking, and it's really looking at asset information. There's some other products that are coming along with COBE, SPIE, which is Specifiers Property Information Exchange, which is going to be getting the manufacturer's product information, the attributes that go along with the different products. We also have HVACIE. There's one for water systems, there's one for electrical, which turn those assets, the single assets, into systems. Again, not repeating the information, just putting the information together differently, so you have a pool of usable information that you can do all kinds of things with afterwards. So, how many people have actually heard of COBE and are potentially even using it? Let's take this poll while I take a drink. And what are we seeing out of that one, Joshua?
Okay, 38% have never heard of it, 48% have heard of it but have not used it, 14% currently planning to implement, 0 currently using it.
Okay, interesting. I will talk a little bit more about what's happening in the UK shortly. They are planning to implement BIM by 2016, and they are using COBE, which was developed in the United States, as the basis for their entire implementation. So it's kind of interesting that we haven't done a very good job, I guess, of getting the word out in the United States. But anyway, we'll talk about that as we go. So one of the things, actually, in talking to some of the folks in the UK, Mark Bew, who's one of the leaders over there, he was talking one day, and I was kind of sketching out ideas, and so this is one of the diagrams that came out of that. As you can see, we just have a little circle down there with its design costs, and we're going in optimizing our design efforts and everything like that. And then we have construction costs. Even looking at life cycle based approach, it's a little bit bigger circle, but the larger circle is how much somebody is paying to operate this facility on an annual basis or for the life cycle of the facility. But what the UK is looking at, and they have support through Parliament also, but what they're looking at is, what is the impact on society? If I go out and save this money, what impact am I going to have on overall return on investment for society? We'll talk a little bit more in a second on that. But I think one of the things we have to also remember is a very small change. If you saw that little red dot pop up in the center of design cost, a very small change there does translate into huge impact later. So the designer does have a big role in all of this, but and they do have to really look at a much bigger picture, a life cycle, again, looking at a life cycle cost. But if we're just trying to optimize the value in the design and construction phase, we haven't really touched on a big portion of the money that's really involved. And so the owner certainly is much more interested in operational costs, and even more important on the, what is the society impact on the product that they're producing. So our goal overall is to shift dollars from OPEX, operational expense, to CAPEX, capital expenses. And what are overall trying to reduce our operating costs, because that then means that we're going to be able to produce more facility as we go on. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what I wanted to talk about here was we talked about a little bit, having a team. There's a couple different kinds of teams. We've got swim teams where the swimmer is really responsible for trying to improve their times. And that's how they contribute to the team. They individually improve their times, and then overall the team wins or loses. But it's really all about the individual. And I'm saying that we really aren't looking for a swim team or a track team or something like that. We're really looking more for a volleyball team. Blair Brown used to be at Penn State. She was 4 years at Penn State. Every year they won a national championship. She was the player of the year and everything like that. But she could not have she could not have been on a winning team even had she not had good support. Somebody had to dig the ball, somebody had to set the ball so that she could hit it over the net. And I think that's the goal that we're really trying, that's the kind of team that we're really trying to build here. So, we don't want to just say we're going to be a team. We want to really specify what kind of team we're going to be, and a team that all parts work together. That's how we're really going to improve productivity and get that information-rich facility that we're looking for. So it's really all about handoffs. How do we hand information off between the owner and the designer to the contractor to the facility owner? In all these cases, and there's probably another dozen different handoffs. So we have the facility, or the fabricator, we have the supplier, all kinds of. There's probably another dozen handoffs that really need to happen, and that we need to optimize. But I think the key right now is, even if you just look at these three, we don't do a very good job at handing off, and I think that's the focus area that we need to work on. So one of the issues with passing information is a level of trust. So let's take an idea of how you feel about the information coming from design and construction. If you're a facility manager, if you're a designer, I think just how do you feel about handing off information to others? Or are you kind of in this mode where you're saying, well, I'll give you this information, but I don't trust it, so you shouldn't either? And because I know it's based on liability and all those issues, but how do we get past, we'll talk about how we get past that in a little bit. So I'll let you take that poll for a second. Okay, so is trust an issue?
So 27% said do not trust information provided by design and construction. 45% said information from design and construction is delivered too late. And then 27% information from design and construction is of value.
Okay, well, good. That's actually encouraging. I think we're making headway in that area. It used to be 0 on C, so that's good news. I'm encouraged. I'll keep going. But I do want to. I think how we fix that somewhat is, and this is really what actually the UK is calling BIM level 3, and I think really looking at what goes into trust. And one of the things is metadata, and I have a soup can up there, because if I took the label off the soup cans and I put them all in my pantry and I wanted a can of tomato soup, I may end up having to open all my cans of soup before I found the one can of tomato soup that I had. Having just a label on it tells me all kinds of things. It tells me, what kind of soup it is. It also tells me the nutritional information. There's probably a date on there someplace that tells me, that I should use it before a certain date and all that kind of stuff. So it's the same kind of thing we're talking about here. Who created it? Why they created it? When did they create it? Those kind of things are really important in understanding, how you trust the information. Maybe it was just a historical cost that somebody put in, square foot cost or something like that. Well, you're not going to take that as seriously as you are if somebody actually got a bid, a quote from a subcontractor to do the work or something like that. So I think that's very important. The other aspect is information assurance, and that means that basically how confident are you that nobody has gone in and changed that information? You know, if you bank online, you know now that you you have to log on, and they're going to check to see what IP address it's coming from, and you know, sometimes they come back and say, hey, you know, it looks like you're using a different computer. We're going to ask you a couple extra questions or something like that. You know, so those are the kind of things that you know, it actually, in going out and collecting that metadata, if it knows which computer you're using, and you maybe you log on and say, hey, what am I doing today? Well, I'm doing preliminary design or something like that, then it doesn't have to ask you that question every time you create an object, but it can go ahead and attach that metadata to that object. The other aspect is being transactional. Again, it's kind of like an accounting system. You know, you never really delete anything in an accounting system. You may edit it and change it, and that's just like if an architect goes out and creates a column and says, okay, it's going to be 12 by 14, the structural engineer comes along and says, well, no, it has to be 12 by 16, then, you know, that architect's decision didn't really go away, but the information was improved or updated by the structural engineer. So I think those are the kind of things. A lot of the software actually supports this kind of stuff, but we haven't asked for it, so in a lot of cases it's not even turned on yet. But I think this is a real piece in getting the whole information, again, to flow and to have confidence in that information. I also mentioned earlier about first cost. This is the definition, or this is the formula for first cost. And if we're talking about sustainability, we can't really use first cost anymore. We have to use total cost of operations. So first cost is a piece of that, certainly, but then we also have to look at the, you know, what is the commissioning cost? What is the cost of operations, maintenance, production, you know, and really even removal and disposal at the end of the process. So we really have to look at a much bigger picture if we're talking about sustainable products and things like that. So that's where I really, you know, we've actually did some work through CABA, the Continental Automated Buildings Association up in Canada, did some research and said, okay, after 40 years of talking about this, how come we're really not using it? And what I found was that the guys over on the other side of BIM, the industrial side that I mentioned earlier, they actually they do use total cost of operations because their orientation is more towards a product, and their building is more of a wrapper around a process, a business process. And that business process is optimized so that they know how much it costs for them to produce the product, and operations cost is part of that. So it's, you know, because that affects their profit overall as to how cheap they can, you know, how inexpensive, let's say anyway, that they can turn out the product. So anyway, that's a big issue. So how about life cycle costing? Where does this group come down on use of life cycle costing at this point? Okay.
Okay, 21% do not use it, 43% want to use it but have no idea, and 36% our decisions are made based on life cycle costing. Okay, so there's a pretty good sized group that is starting to use it, and that's, again, that's encouraging. I know that there are certainly some good examples. Brigham Young University, there's a guy actually just retired not too long ago, Doug Christensen, and Brigham Young University doesn't make a decision to build a new building without a total cost of operation analysis prior to it. So I think probably we're starting to see some people starting to ask for it. I think as far as the issue with no data, again, that's kind of like BIM. You know, you just got to jump in and start doing it. But at the same time, we are working with manufacturers to try to get some of that information. You know, certainly like in the computer industry, you can go out and buy different qualities of, you know, hard drives or something like that. It costs more to have one that lasts longer, and certainly places like you know, Sears or something like that will have their good, better, best type of paint and those kind of things. So you know, so that some of the data is out there, and some of the data is kind of obscured because
some of the vendors don't want to have you compare their products on some of the different attributes. So we are having a little bit of trouble in getting some of that information. However, again, we're going to our friends in the UK, and they're doing a pretty good job of collecting that data. So and a lot of those companies that they're collecting it from now are multinational companies. So I'm feeling confident that we're going to be able to get those companies at least to start using it over here in the United States, and we can then kind of the people that aren't using it are going to be kind of pushed into it from their competitors. But as I said earlier, it really is going to require us, changing the way we do business, and that's how we're going to improve productivity. If we don't change the way we do business, we don't change our productivity, and that diagram that I showed earlier continues. And so that's why, in fact, Norway did a study not too long ago and did show that it hadn't really changed yet. But again, that was because we hadn't really changed the way we were doing business. So, the question is, how do you go out and try to, connect all these different nodes? And I guess this used to build, but the build is gone. But it's all these little pieces have to connect, and there's a process, a way that they connect. And if you can get rid of some of those, again, I go back to the steel industry. They used to have a standard called CIS2, and now they're moving over to IFC because they found that CIS2 was specific to steel, and they found that, well, all buildings aren't made. There's no building that's all steel. They always have to compete, connect with something else. So that's why they went to IFC, because all the software products now really put out. They'll give you a file format and an output in IFC. And so what they found was, as they went through their business process reengineering, and this was the business process reengineering going from CIS2 to IFC, they found that in some cases they didn't even need to do a step anymore. But they just that didn't need to be done anymore. And in other cases, they found that the there was a better way. There might be in like invoicing or something like that. That isn't going to be IFC. That's going to be XML or something. So there are some other standards that do fit into the overall picture. And so that's what you have to do, is go through that process. Now, a lot of the associations, that's why we're the Building Smart Alliance, a lot of the organizations that we're working with are building these models, these business process models, working with their different members and things like that to go through that. So our next question is, on business process reengineering. Have you, implementing BIM, have you gone and just gone out and bought a piece of software, taken the shrink wrap off and started using it, or have you thought about how you were going to change the way you do business and then implemented BIM? So I'll let that go for a couple seconds. Okay, Joshua?
Okay, 73% say we have not implemented BIM,
okay,
and then 13 for each of the other two.
Okay, all right, well that's, and again, I think that's probably typical. I think what happens is, if you look at something like the Smart Market reports that McGraw-Hill has put out, you see a huge number of people saying that they're doing BIM, but I say a lot of them are, as I first mentioned, kind of going out and buying a piece of software and taking the shrink wrap off because they have to say they're doing BIM from a marketing point of view. So I think, there's we still have a ways to go before we really implement BIM in kind of the way that we've been looking at and talking about in this this session today. This, in fact, is the I don't know how many of you are familiar with the BIM execution guide, but the 26 different business use cases that are in that have been augmented a little bit by the international community. And so this is the diagram that they've been using. The boxes that are in green are the ones that actually have business process reengineering, what's called IDMs, Information Delivery Manuals, and Model View Definitions, or MVDs, that have been prepared that are available for the software vendors to start implementing. And I think certainly in the operations side, space management, asset management, as we mentioned, COBE is the asset management, and certainly space management is another area that has had, there are some tools out there now, so that gives you an idea there as to how that's starting to seep into the use cases. So the next question is, and we're going to talk a little bit about the national BIM standard now. So I guess I just wanted to get a feel for how you feel about standards, how you feel about whether you're aware of what the national BIM standard is all about and what we're trying to do there. Okay.
Okay, 38% says was not aware there was a in BMIS.
And BIMS, yeah.
and then 63% said they were aware but not using it, and then 0% said do not see the value.
Okay, good. Well, that's encouraging because clearly if we're going to do BIM and share information across the life cycle, we do have to have standards in place. And we have been working on that as we're actually in the process of publishing version 3 of the National BIM standard. Version 1 was really not the standard. It was pretty much just defining how we were going to do it, because when we started it, there wasn't really anything to standardize. Version 2, which is out there, I checked after even just the first couple of months. We had over 6,000 downloads from 70 different countries, and a lot of those countries are going to use our standard as is. Probably 10 or 15 of those countries will have the wherewithal to change it, but most of them will just use it as is. In fact, along those lines, what we've done is created a wiki to go out and start looking at what different standards, what we call it our ballot pipeline, look at just what people are using as guidelines and things like that around the world, and that's a little bit beyond where we're going to go today. But anyway, we could talk. I could talk about that later if we want to. So what we're looking at is really kind of getting a consensus, putting all these things together so they're in one place, getting a consensus, looking at reference standards, and an example like ISO, the 15926 or 16739 would be reference standards that we would identify. We wouldn't necessarily pull them in, but say these are things that we should be using. We talked about the information exchanges. We're also, typically not in a standard, but talking about best practices or proven practices, and then also trying to provide some guidelines. We'll talk about that a little bit, because the goal is not having to have everybody go out and reinvent these things and these how you do business and things like that. If we have a consensus that this is the right way to go, then that will help everybody. And I use the case again of COBE, because what happened there was, as we put this in the National BIM standard, that's essentially when the UK picked it up and said, okay, yeah, we want to do that too. And that was when that gave the green light to the vendors to invest the money to write the software, and literally millions of lines of code that had to be written, and obviously quite a sizable investment, gave them the green light to go out and put those things into the put COBE into their software. So now all the major software vendors also support COBE, and there's a list. If you go to our website, you can find the list of the companies, both the design tools and the CAFM programs or IWIMS programs that will read and understand COBE. So just to kind of get a picture of how all this goes together in version 3 anyway, what we did was we went out and the Corps of Engineers has been looking at this stuff for quite a while. They've got over 500 BIMs that they've put together, and in doing that, they've perfected their contract language a bit. So what we did was ask them to kind of scrub it a little bit for kind of a national audience and everything, so it's not specific to any vendor or anything like that. And they've gone out and they've shown how they tie in the BIM execution guide that Penn State put together and was funded by PENCO Foundation. They show how the levels of development that were developed by that identify how the different levels of of quality, because what happens is, if you first you might say, okay, I have an opening here, and then that's going to be a door, and then that's going to turn into a solid core wood door, and then that's going to turn into a door with a fire rating of such and such. So as you go through decisions, you improve the level of development of that object, and so that's what this the LOD goes out and looks at. This is kind of the diagram for COBE, how COBE fits into the whole thing. So then how IFC fits in, how a thing called OmniClass, and OmniClass a lot of people know about, but they might not know it by OmniClass. It includes the master format table as well as OmniClass tables. And so what this contract language does is identifies the language that you need to go out and set up to be able to go out and build buildings. This just happens to be a Corps of Engineers building, but what it does also show is how all these different pieces come together, how the Corps of Engineers, Penn State, AIA, AGC, the buildingSMART, CSI, all those come together to produce the facilities. So that's what we're trying to show with the standard is how to do that, how to make all those things happen, so that you can steal the contract language from the standard and use that language in your contracts to be able to contract for this different information. And I mentioned earlier the ballot pipeline. I forgot I had this in here, but we're saying, okay, somebody starts with an office practice, and then an association picks that up and says, yeah, okay, enough offices feel that this is a proven, becomes a proven practice. We get proven practices from other countries, and we go ahead and start coordinating all those efforts, and that's how we really get this, we create information, information for new ballots in the national BIM standard, and it's we'll have national BIM standard China, we'll have national BIM standard Australia, we'll have national BIM standard UK, things like that. So it's the core of it is going to be as common as possible, and then the parts that are unique to a country make it the dash whatever country it is. This is a diagram that Bill East put together, really showing how all these different information exchanges go together. So what information you require, let's say going from programming to design construction, and then commissioning and operations, and being able to tie all these different pieces together. So the ones in yellow are the ones that are developed and in fact now part of the National BIM Standard version 3. So it's starting to show how COBE relates to HVAC, IE, and the electrical systems and water systems, things like that. So all these, all of it fits together. All of it does have a plan, and that's why one of the things we're going to start doing with the National BIM Standard, and then probably a supporting document that goes along with that will go into more information of how all this ties together. The other piece that's out there that's being worked on by quite a few countries, as you can see there listed, is the buildingSMART Data Dictionary. And that's also a very critical thing. It started out, and it still is, it says that, okay, in the United States it's called an elevator, in the UK it's going to be called a lift. But even more important, even in the United States, is if I put a CMU into the model and you're looking for concrete masonry in it, you're not going to find my CMU. So we have to be able to understand what all the different synonyms are out there so that we can tie all these things together. So we're putting in all the OmniClass tables. We're putting in different things from Norway. Actually is doing quite a bit of work in the data dictionary and has invested a lot of money. And then also Uniclass comes from the UK and things like that. So there's a lot of countries that are working hard on this, and we do need to figure out how to invest some money so that we can do a better job in building this dictionary, because it's very important for all of us in moving forward. The other thing is that, and I am going to have to cut off right at the top of the hours, because we have a group called we have a group that's of educators, and so what we're looking at is how do we, what should we teach and what don't we teach? We don't teach proprietary software, but we should teach how to solve problems, how to go out and use the different tools and things like that. I know I started out and this dates me a little bit, with a tool called WordStar. and WordStar was word processing, the first version of word processing, and it was wonderful. We thought, oh, this is really great. Well, if you look at it now, it's really pretty clunky. And it has progressed so fast so far, and now the intent. But I used WordStar, I used WordPerfect, I used Multimate, I used all kinds of different word processing tools, and because I knew what I wanted to do, I could adapt to different tools. And that's what we're really saying is going to happen here too, is you're not necessarily married to one proprietary tool. You need to know what you want to try to accomplish. You need to know what knowledge, skills, and abilities you need, and we need to share those across all the colleges and universities. So here we've put together what we call the Academic Interoperability Coalition, which is really a committee of Building Smart Alliance. And these are the schools that are participating right now, as well as there's some international folks, as well as some Autodesk is participating, HOK, and we've got Building Smart Canada is working closely with us on that too. So we're starting to go and look at how do we go out and really change the way we educate. So that's a big piece of it. And I mentioned it's all about empowering owners, and I think that's it's all about really getting to the point of valuing information, identifying how much we can pay for it, and then potentially even reselling it. Setting up an iTunes for the construction industry, if you will. If it cost me $1 to go out and collect a piece of information earlier, it would be far better for me to sell it to somebody else for 50 cents than to have them go out and spend another $1 to collect it. And when you do this 10,000 times or more for a project, it could actually get to be a significant amount of money. So one of the things we're looking at is just, is there a way to kind of monetize the information process? So again, not having everybody collect and recollect the information. So overall, and kind of starting to wrap up here a little bit, where do we stand in the world? This is a chart that came out by McGraw-Hill in their Smart Market report, and they were saying, what's the and I know that we don't have a lot of contractors here. There's some other charts. I guess they could have chosen if I had known the the mix up today. But the it's all about what your perceived return on investment is on BIM, and quite frankly, in some of the other charts that really kind of support this, said we're not feeling that there's a lot of return on investment, where a lot of other countries that are really starting to implement BIM more strongly are feeling, in fact, that it is a real value. You'll notice, however, that the UK on this chart is below us. But I think what's happened there, and actually both UK and South Korea both have active plans. In fact, I just met with a group from South Korea this morning. They have active plans to change the way they're doing business. And sad to say, we in the United States don't have a good plan really to change. And we don't have a, we have some agencies are going out and starting to ask for BIM, and you saw from the way some of our polls went today that we're kind of, well, we're thinking about it, but we haven't really gotten into it too much. And so I think that's one of the big things we want to make sure that the next time this chart comes out, that we're not on the bottom, because the UK and South Korea have implemented their plans and they're seeing a positive return on investment. Just talking about the UK a little bit, and why it's working, I think, there is they have somebody in the Parliament, Francis Maud, that has said, this is how we're going to change the way we procure things and how we're going to meet our carbon footprint goals. There's Dave Phillip that supports him, and there is not an I at the end. I didn't misspell it. But he works for Francis Maud. He's the action officer to go out and get people to implement this. And then Mark Bew, who I've known actually for a very long time, is kind of the action officer to make all this happen. But I think a lot of it can be summarized in kind of the way they're looking at this, and that goes back to that circle diagram I showed earlier, that they're looking to save 15 to 20%, become more 20% more efficient by 2016, which is not too far away now, by freeing up money that then they can go out and invest in other facilities. So what they're saying is, by being able to save this 20%, freeing up 1.2 billion pounds, they can build 60 new secondary schools. So that again goes back to that whole societal impact. What's this societal impact of having 60 new schools? What's the societal impact of going from Victorian age prisons to modern prison facilities that don't need as many people to manage them and things like that? So one of the other things that we've done to kind of get us in the right mode here is we went out and said, okay, let's have a grand challenge. Let's say by 2021, the United States, 7 years from now, what happened, how can we implement BIM? So what we did here at the Institute was we wrote a document, and it's a PDF that you can download from that address that's on the screen there. And what is the building industry going to look like in 2021? So we had 40 different people from different facets of the industry go out and write essays. Spec writers, cost engineers, architects, facility managers, lawyers, you name it. Put these, and in fact, some of the essays are posted on the website too. Then we took all that and we put it into a story that people could read and just get an idea of what things are going to look like at some, hopefully by 2021, if we pull our act together and really get some leadership. Quite frankly, we need a Francis Maud in the United States. So if anybody has an idea on who that leader can be in the United States, because we're very fragmented. And we don't have somebody that's can mandate that says this is the way we should go. But if we can get somebody to kind of step up and take on that responsibility, then I think we can be competitive in the world in the future. If we don't, we've got some problems. So the last poll that I'll ask for you is: are you interested in joining our effort? And will you, even if you don't join, will you look into supporting the open standards through the National BIM standard? Or are you still convinced that BIM's a solution looking for a problem and see little value? Did I convince you? So did I convince them?
40% said interested in joining and supporting. 60% said we'll support open standards but not join.
Okay. And is anybody not convinced?
0.
Yes. All right, I guess I accomplished my mission here today. So if you do have any questions or want to get in touch with me, please reach out. And there's lots of different ways to reach out, so any one of them is acceptable. And I'd love to hear from you. And I can probably take some questions if you have some. I've got about 5 minutes or so.
Yep. One here is, could you remark on the implications for ISO 55000, asset management recently released?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with that one, to be honest. I mean, I know about it, but I'm not sure I could really comment on it at this point. I'd have to do some research, so if you could drop me a line on that, I'll let you know. We may even have it in our BIM wiki. I'd have to look that too, but I'd have to research on that one before I could really answer that. Sorry.
And then Andy has a good point. He just reminded everyone that IFMA is working to create a one-day BIM FM/CRE working meeting at Facility Fusion in Orlando in 2015. So thank you, Andy, for reminding us of that.
Appreciate that, Andy.
I know IFMA, were you involved with IFMA's BIM conference at this past Facility Fusion in DC?
I wasn't. Andy wanted me to be, and I was leaving on a cruise to go transatlantic on the day it started, so unfortunately I wasn't able to.
Decision. Huh?
Where are my priorities,
Right. But yeah, so that one, but I heard that conference actually went really well. And then
yeah, I understand it.
Is BIM applicable to design build projects specifically, or can it be used for managing basic facilities, offices?
Well, actually, interestingly enough, one of the first projects that I looked at was the USC Center for Cinematic Arts out in California. And interestingly enough, that was a design bid build project, but they got together as a team, a true team as I was defining it here, and they made it happen. So it can happen in any kind of environment, quite frankly, I believe. I think it's more of a state of mind, a little bit, that says, hey, I'm going to create a BIM, and if I find any information, I'm going to put it there. I don't want to. I don't care whether it's when you replace the water heater or when you replace the any device or whatever, or what color paint you used or whatever. Just as you get information, put it someplace, not necessarily on a 3x5 card, so you can actually get to it again. I think the Coast Guard did some really innovative stuff initially, where they started out and said, okay, we have all these facilities, we know how many square feet they are, we know what the title of the facility is and where it's located. We're going to create BIM blobs. And they just said, this is a blob of how much square footage we have. And over time, they went out and got floor plans, and as they did projects, whether they were renovation projects or whatever, they went out and collected that information, and it ended up, the neat part about it was that the facilities that they did more work on, which were typically their more critical facilities, were the ones that they had more information, collected more information on. And so those are the ones that had the better BIMs after a period of time. We're talking, 10, 15 years even, to build up on existing facilities. The other thing that we're starting to see is and again on a kind of a design, bid, build, operate, I'm not design, bid, build, excuse me, DBOM, design, build, operate, maintain. We're starting to see where those are probably the most successful, again, because people are looking at a life cycle kind of approach. In fact, there's a project that we're looking at using as an example to harmonize between the two standards that I was talking about earlier, 15926 and 16739. It's a courthouse building that is a private-public partnership that after, I think, 20-plus years, they're supposed to turn the facility back at a 0.85 facility condition index, which is almost new. And they're finding actually that it's not costing them that much more to build it that way than traditionally, which is kind of a surprise to everybody. But they're going through and doing that analysis and finding that. So it's like I say, the payback is huge on this stuff.
Great. Okay, we have 2 more slides to go through at the end.
Okay. All right. Yep. Sync. I don't know.
There we go. The FMCC. There we go. The FMCC would like to thank everyone for attending. We have a listing of the additional counsel that IFMA does have here for you, and they're a great resource in all those areas, so you can look into those. And then you can also get additional information on their website, on our website, ifma.org. And again, Deke, thank you for joining us for the FMCC webinar. And thank you, everyone. You have a great day. And if you have any questions, certainly feel free and email Deke. And again, an email will be sent out later today with a link to the recording and a PDF of the slide deck.
And I do appreciate it. Thank you very much, all.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.